I have a question for you listening out there. Have you ever had to deal with someone who just seems like utterly impervious to logic?
Oh, yeah, constantly.
Right. Or maybe someone who is just constantly making excuses, or even worse, someone who just seems to stir up endless drama wherever they go.
We've definitely all been there.
Yeah.
And, usually we just vent to a friend about it and try to move on with our day.
Exactly. We tend to just treat those encounters as, I don't know, temporary annoyances.
Yeah, we write them off as just a bad day at the office or a difficult neighbor we just have to put up with.
But the source material for today's deep dive takes those exact types of people and, well, subjects them to an absolute masterclass in psychological and spiritual anatomy.
It really does. It's incredibly thorough.
It is. We are looking at this deeply fascinating, multi-layered document titled Personal Exegesis Study Proverbs, Chapter 26, written by a scholar named Frank Leo.
And right away, just looking at the document, you get a sense of how expansive this study is.
Yeah, I mean, even just looking at the author's name, his name is listed across multiple languages right in the text. There's Luzantang, Moshe Halevi, Frank Kiskos, Moises Lukatakis, and Moshe Levin.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the kind of deep linguistic and, cross-cultural analysis that's about to happen.
Right. The mission of this deep dive is to basically dissect 3 highly dangerous character types that threaten any community: the fool, the sluggard, and the troublemaker.
3 timeless archetypes.
Exactly. And to do this, our sources are incredibly diverse. We're going to be looking at the traditional Hebrew texts, the Masoretic text, along with early Greek translations like the Septuagint, the Syriac Peshitta, cross-references from the New Testament.
And even, surprisingly, the ancient Mandaean scriptures.
Yes. Specifically a text called the Jinza Rabbah. I mean, it's a massive scope.
It is. Plus, we have the insights of some historical heavyweights of biblical commentary woven in. Scholars like Charles Haddon Spurgeon, John MacArthur, and the Jamieson Fawcett Brown commentary.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we want to understand how to protect a community, or, even just protect our own peace of mind, we really have to start with the absolute greatest threat.
The fool.
The fool. And right away, the sources make it very clear that folly here is not about having a low IQ or, lacking education.
No, not at all. Folly, in this context, is fundamentally a moral and spiritual orientation.
It's a choice.
Right. The text opens with this incredibly vivid agricultural imagery. It says that giving honor to a fool is as unnatural as snow falling in the summer or rain pouring down during the harvest.
I noticed in the notes that some of the early Greek translations, the LXX, swap out snow for dew using the word drosos.
Yeah, drosos.
Yeah.
But the underlying point remains exactly the same. It's about something being completely disastrously out of place.
Right, and out of place in a way that is highly destructive. I think the JFB commentary refers to these as destructive anomalies.
Think about an ancient agricultural economy. If you get a blizzard in the middle of summer or a torrential downpour when you were trying to bring in the wheat harvest, that doesn't just look strange.
It destroys your livelihood.
Exactly. It brings famine.
So giving honor to a fool is it's like throwing a massive celebratory parade for a devastating hurricane.
That is a fantastic way to visualize it.
It's not just weird. You are literally celebrating your own destruction.
You are applauding the very thing that is tearing the roof off your house. Commentators like Spurgeon and MacArthur point out that the fool is someone who fundamentally rejects God. But the world often has this inverted value system that celebrates them anyway.
Which is terrifying, honestly. The document even draws a parallel to the Mandaean scriptures here, which I found totally fascinating.
Oh, the concept of Manda.
Yes. In Mandaism, honor only belongs to those who are walking in knowledge, which they call Manda, and definitely not those who are actively pursuing darkness or hookah.
Which perfectly sets up one of the most famous dilemmas in all of wisdom literature.
Right, in verses 4 and 5.
Yeah. Shortly after setting up the danger of the fool, the text presents a massive paradox about how to actually talk to them. It gives 2 completely contradictory commands back to back.
The paradox of engagement. First, it says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him." Which, makes total sense. Don't stoop to their level.
Don't get in the mud.
But then the very next breath says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." Wait, the text literally contradicts itself back to back. How are you supposed to know which rule to follow?
What's fascinating here is that this apparent contradiction is entirely deliberate.
Deliberate.
Yeah. As MacArthur notes in the study, human problems are deeply complicated. They can't be solved by appealing to a rigid mathematical algorithm where input A always equals output B.
So you can't just run a script for human interaction.
Exactly. You need the Hebrew concept of tima.
Tima.
Huh.
I've seen that translated as wisdom, but it feels a bit more nuanced than just, being smart.
It means practical wisdom or skill in living. It's the situational discernment to know what a specific, messy human interaction actually requires in that exact moment.
Okay, that makes sense.
The author of the study uses Jesus in the New Testament as the ultimate example of this open action.
Oh, right. During his trials?
Yes. When Jesus stood before the high priest on trial, facing completely baseless accusations, he offered holy silence. That's verse 4. He didn't engage with the folly on its own terms, which prevented him from getting dragged down into their illegitimate framework.
He recognized that answering would just validate their fake trial, but then later, when he was dealing with the Sadducees, who were trying to trap him with those theological riddles,
he offered a sharp, holy rebuke. He told them outright that they were mistaken because they didn't know the scriptures.
Ah, so that's verse 5.
Exactly. That is answering the fool so they don't remain self-assured in their error. There is a time when engaging drags you down, and there is a time when silence just confirms the fool in his self-conceit.
So dealing with the fool is this incredibly delicate balancing act. You have to read the room and decide if your words will shatter their illusion or just, pull you into their vortex.
Precisely.
But that brings up a broader question for me. If dealing with a fool is so exhausting, why don't they just learn? Why don't they change?
Well, the text actually provides an answer about the core nature of a fool, and it is grotesque, but absolutely unforgettable.
Yeah, we are moving into verse 11 now.
The metaphor used is a dog returning to its vomit, comparing it to a fool repeating their folly.
It really doesn't get much more graphic than that. It's visceral.
It is deliberately revolting. The early Greek Septuagint actually expands on it, adding that the dog becomes detestable.
Wow.
And this image is so powerful that it's quoted directly in the New Testament. In 2 Peter 2.22, it's paired with another image, a washed sow returning to wallow in the mud.
And the notes point out that some of the earliest Syriac translations, the Peshitta, use a specific word for that mud sayana.
Yes, Siana. It implies a deep, sticky mire. It's not just getting a little dirty. It's a total, willing regression to filth.
The study document draws a striking parallel here from the Mandan text, too. The Jinzarava.
Right.
They have this teaching that once a soul receives knowledge from Mandadihai, the knowledge of life, if that soul willfully returns to the darkness, it is considered the ultimate spiritual degradation.
Which perfectly aligns with historical commentary on this proverb. Spurgeon points out that an unregenerate nature will always naturally gravitate toward its old sins.
Like a magnet.
Exactly. He uses Pharaoh in the book of Exodus as the classic example. Whenever Pharaoh was given relief from a plague, he didn't learn his lesson. He just hardened his heart and returned to his obstinacy.
Because it's his nature.
Right. The Jameson Fawcett Brown commentary notes a chilling detail about this. The fool actually delights in their folly. It's not an accident. It's their default setting.
It's like a software glitch. You have a program that is fundamentally coded to crash, reset, and then inevitably crash again. It can't do anything else because of how it's built.
That's a great analogy.
But here's what I don't get. The dog returning to the vomit is this incredibly graphic, absolute rock-bottom image. But then, in verse 12, the text says that a man who is wise in his own eyes is actually worse off.
Yeah, it says there's more hope for a fool than for him.
Right. Why is self-conceit the ultimate dead end? How can you be worse than the dog in verse 11?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes a lot of psychological sense. The simple fool, the one making a visible, disgusting mess of their life, might eventually look at the wreckage and realize they lack something.
Like hitting rock bottom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is at least a tiny window for self-awareness. But the man who is wise in his own eyes has built an impenetrable wall of pride.
Oh, I see. They don't even know they're sick.
Right.
You can't offer medicine to someone who is absolutely convinced they are the healthiest person in the room.
Self-conceit is the final fortification of folly. As MacArthur points out, the greatest fool is the fool who does not know he is a fool.
That is terrifying.
It's a terrifying level of self-deception because it completely cuts off all avenues for growth or rescue.
Okay, so if the fool actively returns to their mess, our second dangerous character type operates through total inaction. We are moving on to the sluggard.
Ah, yes, the sluggard.
But as we'll see, even though they aren't physically moving, their mind is actually working overtime.
So true. In verses 13 through 16, the text gives us the classic excuse of the sluggard. There's a lion in the road. A fierce lion is in the streets.
Which is just a wild excuse for not leaving the house.
And some of the early Greek translations, the LXX, intensify the absurdity here by adding, and murderers in the streets.
Because one lion just isn't enough of an excuse to cancel your plans. You need a lion and a gang of assassins to truly justify staying in bed all day.
Spurgeon has this brilliant psychological insight on this exact dynamic. He notes that the sluggard is as cunning as any fox and can create excuses faster than most people can refute them.
So the fear isn't real. The lion doesn't actually exist.
No, it's entirely manufactured to avoid effort.
It is the product of a highly creative mind that is dedicated entirely to doing absolutely nothing.
Compare this to the Mandean ethical code we discussed earlier. Their ancient texts demand that the righteous person, the viraza, must actively perform good works.
So laziness isn't just a minor character flaw for them.
No, it is totally incompatible with a righteous life. If you have the strength, you are morally obligated to act.
Here's where it gets really interesting, at least for me. Verse 14. The ancient writers paint this incredibly visual picture of the sluggard turning on his bed like a door turning on its hinges.
That's a great visual.
It's like someone running on a treadmill and bragging about how far they've traveled. I mean, there is a ton of motion going on. Twisting, turning, flipping the pillow, tossing under the covers, but zero actual progress.
They are physically attached to the bed, just like the door is bolted to the frame.
Exactly.
JFB's commentary unpacks this well. It is a humorous image, sure, but it highlights the tragedy of moral cowardice and creative self-deception.
How so?
Well, the lion in the street is virtually impossible, but the sluggard invents it, tells himself the story repeatedly, and eventually he actually starts to believe his own lie.
Oh, wow.
He traps himself in a prison of his own making, expending way more energy defending his inaction than it would have taken to just, do the work.
So true. Now, while the sluggard's self-deception primarily paralyzes themselves, what happens when that same creative deception is weaponized against others?
That brings us to our third character type.
Yes, the troublemaker or the meddler. They use deception to basically burn down the entire community around them.
The mechanics of this are laid out beautifully in verse 20. The text states that where there is no wood, the fire goes out. And where there is no talebearer, the Hebrew word is nirgan, strife ceases.
A nirgan. Someone who spreads malicious gossip.
Right. And the LXX calls this person double-minded.
Which gets right to the heart of their deceptive nature. They show you one face while whispering behind your back.
Exactly.
I saw in the notes that this connects directly to the book of James in the New Testament, chapter 3, which famously describes the human tongue as a fire, a world of unrighteousness that stains the whole body.
And the Mandean scriptures echo this perfectly, too. Their ethical mandates specifically command believers to fast with their mouths from sinful lying talk.
Fasting from gossip. That is a powerful framing.
And Spurgeon gives incredibly practical advice here. He points out that you have the power to stop gossip simply by being the dead end.
Be the dead end.
Yes. When a malicious whisper reaches an ear that refuses to pass it forward, the fire loses its oxygen. Gossip is the fuel. Strife is the fire.
But the troublemaker isn't always obvious about their intentions, right? Verse 23 uses an analogy of a cheap clay pot covered in silver dross.
Sejam, yes. The waste material from smelting silver.
Right, so it looks shiny and valuable, but it's just painted over common clay. It says that fervent, passionate lips covering a wicked heart are just like that cheap pot. It's pure illusion.
The passionate words of a deceiver might sound beautiful and earnest, but they are just a thin coating over a wicked intention.
Which brings us to the inevitable consequence of all this deception in verse 27, the universal law of retribution.
Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. And he who rolls a stone, it will come back on him.
The ultimate boomerang effect.
Spurgeon loved citing historical examples of this moral gravity. Think of Haman building a gallows in the book of Esther, only to be hanged on it himself.
Oh, classic.
Or the enemies of Daniel who were thrown into the very lion's den they prepared for him.
And this concept isn't isolated to the biblical texts. The study points out that in Mandean theology, there is a concept of a Medarta, or a judgment station.
Yes, the scales of Abathar.
Right. After death, a soul is weighed on Abathar's cosmic scales and their deeds return upon themselves. It's the exact same principle across cultures. You reap what you sow.
Then the analysis concludes with a really dark psychological twist about the nature of a liar in verse 28. It observes that a lying tongue actually hates those it has crushed.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on that. A lying tongue hates those it has crushed. That feels completely backwards to me.
How so?
You'd think the victim hates the liar, right? Why does the aggressor, the person telling the lies, hate the person they just victimized?
This raises an important question about cognitive dissonance, and JFB provides a profound answer. The act of deception breeds contempt for the victim.
Really?
Think about it. If you are actively harming someone through your lies, how do you live with yourself? You have to dehumanize them.
Oh, I see.
You have to convince yourself that they deserve it, or that they are foolish for believing you in the first place. The liar develops a deep hatred, not just for the truth, but for the very people they are victimizing, simply to justify their own wickedness to their own conscience.
Wow. That is incredibly dark, but it makes so much sense of how toxic environments escalate. You don't just lie to someone. You end up despising them for being the target of your lie.
You have to make them the bad guy in your head so you can still be the hero of your own story.
Which is exactly why the troublemaker is so incredibly destructive to a community. They don't just spread falsehoods. They actively generate hatred and relational rot from the inside out.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of ground here, drawing from the MT, the LXX, the Peshitta, the Jinzaraba, and centuries of psychological and theological commentary. Let's synthesize the big takeaways from Frank Leo's deep dive.
I see four major theological and practical pillars emerging from all these sources. First, true honor is inherently tied to cosmic order and wisdom. The fool rejects that order. So honoring a fool is an act of cosmic rebellion that invites chaos into your life.
Number 2. The unregenerate human nature, the dog returning to its mess, requires profound divine intervention to change.
Right. Folly isn't just a bad habit you can life hack your way out of. Without a completely new nature, it's a fundamental operating system.
Number 3. Words have immense physical destructive power. They are the literal fuel for the fire of community strife. But, conversely, knowing when to be silent and when to speak truth is the ultimate hallmark of practical wisdom, or go.
And finally, moral causality is woven into the very fabric of creation. Whether it's the ancient proverb about reaping what you sow or the mundane scales of Abathur, the pit you dig for someone else is the exact pit you will eventually fall into.
It's a sobering but incredibly grounding reality to keep in mind as we navigate complex relationships.
It really is.
And I want to leave you listening to this with a final lingering thought. We've spent this entire deep dive looking outward, right? We've been identifying the fool, the sluggard, and the troublemaker as other people who threaten our communities or our peace of mind.
Always the other person.
Always. But considering what we just learned about the stubborn, deeply ingrained nature of the human heart, could it be that these aren't just 3 types of toxic neighbors? Could they actually be 3 internal defense mechanisms?
That's a challenging thought.
When we ourselves are faced with hard truths, do we defensively play the prideful fool, building an impenetrable wall of self-conceit? Do we manufacture lines in the street to avoid doing the hard work we know we desperately need to do? Or do we use a silver coating of passionate words to hide our own selfish intentions? Next time you spot one of these traits, ask yourself, am I looking out a window or into a mirror?